Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. First off, my name is Lucas Wendt. I am the CMI Training Development Specialist here at ISSA. I will be moderating today's webinar as we go through the What Sales Winners Do Differently. Just before we get started, I'd like to touch on some housekeeping notes. The webinar will include a Q&A following the presentation, so please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation to be answered during the Q&A after the presentation is completed. To submit a question, click on the question tab and submit to our team where we will monitor those and ask them at the end of the session. We will also be sending out a copy of the webinar presentation later this week to all of the attendees for you to view at another date as well. Also, I would like to touch on that during the presentation, we will have two polls that will take place, and we will ask for your participation in these polls. They will pop up at that time on your screen, and you'll be able to select the answer to participate, and it'll be about 15 seconds to answer those, so please participate with those. But without further ado, I would like to introduce today's webinar host. We are going to have John Doerr, who is the president of the Rain Group, who has an extensive career in business leadership, senior executive management, and business development. John is also a best-selling author of multiple books, including The Rainmaking Conversations and Insight Selling. John is the leader in Rainmaker. He has sold millions of dollars of complex products and services to the world's most prestigious organizations. So to get us started today, I would like to transition this over and introduce you guys to John Doerr.
Thanks so much, Lucas, and good morning, good afternoon, or wherever anybody is listening to this today. Welcome to this webinar. So this, as it showed on the title page, is about insight selling and what sales winners do differently. And if you think about selling, if you've been selling for any number of years, you realize that selling has changed over the years. Years ago, you sold features and benefits, and that's what you did well, and you learned your products and services inside and out, and that's what you concentrated on. And then in the late 70s, we switched over to consultative selling, and that was a term coined by Mac Hannon, who actually, when I was a business publisher, was one of my authors, and he came out with the first book on consultative selling. And it's where you didn't sell features and benefits, but instead you asked questions and found out how you could help and then matched up what you had to the needs of your customer or client. But back in 2008, things started to change radically for selling. Now, it was a tough time in a lot of ways because of the Great Recession, but it was also a sea change of thinking about what selling was all about. And that's what we're going to talk about today. What has changed? What is important now to be one of those winners, to find out what sales winners do differently? Now, over the years, some things haven't changed. You have a great deal of value. That's what you believe in. The product or the service that you provide is going to provide great value to your customer in their business or to themselves personally. And if you can convey that value, that's how you get sales. And if you get the sales, of course, if you're an individual salesperson, you get commissions and bonuses. If you're a business, you get higher profits. But it's simply to get that idea of what you have about value to the buyer so you can get sales. And what is the secret to that? Well, it's not a secret. It's about communication. It's about how you communicate and what you do. Now, years ago, before we had the ubiquitous internet, one of the roles of the salesperson was to be able to talk about what was different. And you were relied on to provide that information about your service, your company, and your product. But today, everybody goes to the internet to look you up first. In fact, our research has shown that 82% of buyers will go to look you up on LinkedIn to find out about you. And they're certainly going to your website. So what happens is, although websites have changed dramatically from when they were just electronic brochures, you still have a problem, and that everything starts to look the same. And that's frustrating for all of you out there, because you're thinking, I know my stuff is different. I know my stuff is better. I know what I can do provides more value. But you want to be able to get beyond that commodity trap. And unfortunately, when you get a commodity trap, the only thing that people look at are fees. How much does it cost? Can I get a generic product for less? Can I go to a different provider who's going to do it cheaper? Because it all seems the same. So what your job in sales now is to, how do I get across that we are different and what I offer does provide more value and give you a better outcome? Because your goal is to get that value across and to let you stand out. And as a member of ISSA, you know there are things that you gain and you have that are different, but it's about getting that value across. So what we're going to talk today about is, how do I bring that value so that it makes a difference and so I don't have to fight this commodity trap? We talked about is communication, and it is about conversations. We know that. So what we did here at Rain Group is we wanted to know, what did sales winners do most differently? Now, there have been lots of research in looking at the sellers and finding out what they seem to think they did differently. And sometimes, as we all know, we're not sure what we did, and we're not as aware as if we were having somebody observe us. So we asked the buyers, we asked your customers, you asked your clients, we asked the people you sell to, what did the person selling to you do differently? And we surveyed 700 plus buyers and looked at the purchases and looked at what they did. And this is across all industries and geographies around the world. And altogether, these buyers were responsible for over $3 billion in products and services bought. So pretty significant. And not just surveying them, we wanted to do deeper conversations with the buyers. So we talked to 300 plus buyers to find out what was going on from them. We wanted to dig deeper. What made the difference? And among the many questions we asked, one of the most important questions was, think about the last time you bought something. And we're talking about a complex service. We're not talking going to the corner store and buying something. We're talking in a business situation where they had to choose among various vendors. And we wanted to know, what did the sales winner do differently? Now, the way we posed it, we gave them 42 attributes to choose from. And we wanted them to think about and rank, as you remember it, why did you pick somebody over somebody else? Why did you let that person be the winner? What did they do versus a second place finisher? Now, we know in sales, second place finisher is a polite way to say the loser, but that's what we wanted to know. Now, among the attributes that we asked about were these of the 42. Did they depict the purchasing process accurately, collaborated, understood my needs, helped me avoid potential pitfalls, connected with me, relationships, persuaded me we would get the results we wanted? That was important. Did they listen to me? Did they craft a solution? So if they were, if it was more complex sales, most of these were, is a solution that made sense. Did they give me new ideas that I didn't have before? And it was the overall value. So we're going to bring up a poll. Lucas, if you could bring up that poll now. And I'm going to make it easy for you. You're going to have actually, I think you got 5 to choose from, A, B, C, D, or E, and give you about 15 seconds. What do you think was the number one thing of the things listed here that separated the winners from the second place finishers? So I think we're bringing up the poll now, and you're going to go in there and answer the poll. Take a minute to think, but you got 15 seconds. What's your gut reaction to say this is what separated the winners from the second place finishers? So I think everybody is just about finished and get the answers in a moment. But as we wait for the answers, I know a lot of times when we do this poll, a lot of people look at the understood my needs and listen to me as the first ones. And I'm not trying to sway your answers. I'm assuming everybody's already put their answer in here. But the major difference is what was the first thing? So with the results we got, so 41% of you said it was A, listen to me. 5% of you said collaborated with me. 18% said educated me with new ideas or perspectives. 5% persuaded me we would achieve results. And the last one, 32% understood my needs. Now, I'm going to tease you a little bit here, and I'm not going to give you the answer just yet, but I just want you to recognize that the two winners in this were A, listen to me with 41%, and E, 32% said understood my needs. So what I was going to say is, those weren't the top two. I'll give you a little bit of a clue on this. But years ago, when we did this, those were in the top two. And so you're going to see how things have changed. And I say years, it was probably the first time we did this kind of research was in 2007. 2009, we did it again. We've been doing it since. When we first started with consultative selling, it was about listening and understood my needs. So let's see what happens. So as we go forth and we start to do the reveal, we're going to show you what you have to do, put it all together to win. So to set the stage a little bit for you, back in 2011, there was an article by Harvard Business Review, very well respected journal. They talked about selling, and Matt Dixon and Brent Addison wrote their research, and they said that selling is not about relationships. And basically they said relationship selling is no more. It's not about relationships. And we looked at that, and we knew how we sold. We talked to clients all the time. We're in this industry, and that didn't quite sit right with us. So we wanted to figure out, is that true? So that really led us to start to look into our deeper research. And to give you an idea of how this all plays out about relationships and why we still think it's important, so those of you who are looking at this and say, wait a minute, I still believe it's in relationships, and a lot of what you sell, I'm sure, is based on that. Let me tell you a little story. So years ago, I went to work for a company that was about to go public. And we went through the whole process. And part of it, we were a smaller company, and we had to switch from our local great accounting firm to one of the larger accounting firms. Because if we're going to go public, we wanted that leverage and that expertise behind it. And we picked a particular accounting firm. And I was curious. It's not a question of was it right or wrong, but I was curious about why we picked who we picked. And so I went to our CFO and I said, how come you chose who you chose? And he brought out this chart, very similar to the chart that he used with me. And he had firm C there circled. And I said, oh yeah, that got a 90. Oh, but wait a minute. Firm E is an 89. That must have been really tough to make a choice. Why did you choose them? Well, the CFO, being a numbers guy, didn't want to admit why he really chose them, so he closed the door and sort of in his best whisper said, I liked them best. And in the end, he did have to make a decision based on that chart. And he did have to justify that to the other members of the management team. But given the choice between the 90 and the 89, he wanted to pick the person he knew he was going to work with day and night, some very long nights, and he wanted to know it was somebody he liked working with. So it wasn't that the relationships were dead. They were part of what was going to influence things, but it wasn't the only thing. Now we go back to Harvard Business Review, and a year later they came out with saying that it was not a question of just relationships are dead. They took it a step further and said the end of solution sales. So if you look at solution selling, which many people grew up on, and if you look at consultative selling, which is a form of that, people say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? I'm not supposed to find out customer needs? What am I supposed to do instead? In fact, what they were saying is the star salespeople sought to upend the customer's view. They told them things that they weren't comfortable with and pushed, and they came out with a concept called the challenger sale. But again, we're thinking, that doesn't sound exactly right for everyone. Well, I said I'd give you a preview of the top things that we found that separated. So let me give you a little bit of a taste here. Understood my needs, that some of you had as the top, many of you had as the top, was number 5. And crafted a compelling solution. Now think about this. This is out of top 42. So this is not like you didn't do these at all. They were still important, but it's still not the top thing that stood out in the minds of the buyer. But it was still important. It was number 5. And of course, by having number 5, understanding my needs, I can then craft a compelling solution. So how can it be compelling if it doesn't match to the needs that the customer or the client has? And then number 4, which was also pick number 1 by a lot of you, it was listen to me. So if I listen, I can understand. If I understand, I can craft a compelling solution. And if I do all those things, connect with me personally. So the story about my CFO, it was important that he liked them. But he also went through that chart that they stood out. Now, this was before we did our research, and things might have been a little bit different. But you can see, even though Harvard Business Review in the articles that they published said it's not about relationships anymore, which is connected with me personally, and it's not about solutions, which is listened to me and understood my needs and crafted a compelling solution, those are still important things. You can't forget those. And as Neil Rackham, the founder and the designer of Spin Selling, said in the foreword to our book, the Armageddon approach to sales doesn't help anyone. He's basically saying you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater when you say the title, the end of solution sales. It may have been reduced a little bit, but it's still important. So one of the first things we saw, and what sales winners do differently, is they connect. They connect to the people. I liked them personally. I connected with them. But they also connected the dots. They connected the dots from the needs that the customer or client had to the solution that they had. So they made sure there was a connection. So the first thing we want to look at is, were they able to connect? That's what winners do. They connect. But it gets you in the game now. It doesn't win you the game. That's the important thing. I talk to a lot of people who say, oh, we get by in relationships. We only do relationships. And I ask, how is that going? Well, I have a lot of relationships, but are your accounts growing? Are you getting new places? Are you expanding that? It only starts. And I will tell you, in many cases, if somebody comes out with a more compelling solution or does some of the things that the sales winners do differently, you will find that those relationships aren't going to hold as much. So they are important. They are necessary, but not sufficient. So let's move on. What else did we find out? So I know you thought this was about what sales winners do differently, but I'm going to give you a little history lesson. And I'm going to introduce you to someone, maybe you don't know who this is, but this is the German astrologist and physician, Franz Anton Mesmer. And he was around in the latter half of the 1700s. So those of you who don't like history, we'll get to where this is going in a moment. But Mesmer was very different back at that time. He treated his patients by looking deeply into their eyes and waving magnets in front of their faces. Very different physician. And he believed that there were barriers in our body that disrupted the natural flow of the processes that gave us life and health. And he also believed that if you hold those magnets and penetrate deep into their eyes with the waving of the object, it restored natural order inside his patients and relieved all kinds of maladies. So he got a reputation of being able to cure headaches and blindness and paralysis, even hemorrhoids, if I remember correctly. He became quite the celebrity around Europe, and he toured all over major cities. So what does this have to do with anything? Well, he became so connected with people. He was able to gain complete control, not just of their actions, it was said, but of their thoughts, their perceptions of reality, and their feelings. And thus they were said to have been mesmerized. So that's where the term mesmerized come from this person. So why would you care? Why do you care about Franz Anton Mesmer? Well, you're not going to forget the origin of the word mesmerized anymore, I hope, because you heard it as a story, and I think you're at least more likely to remember it. So if somebody asks you about it, say, oh, I know where the word mesmerized came from. But the other thing is, winners that sell, insight sellers, use the power of the story to mesmerize. You're doing what the good doctor did to all his patients, but without the magnet and the creepy waving of things and all that good stuff. But it is what you have to do. Stories are remembered, and it's that power. So when you're thinking about what you have to do, it gives you the second thing that good salespeople do. They convince. So think about what it takes to convince. So I love to do this in front of a live audience because everybody raises their hand and says, I know who that is. That's Ralphie from A Christmas Story. And the second question I ask, and unfortunately you're all on mute so you can't shout it out, but I know you know what he wanted. He wanted a BB gun, a BB rifle, a Red Ryder BB rifle. How badly did he want it? Well, as we say in Massachusetts, he wanted it wicked bad. And it was that ability to believe and want something and help somebody see that they need what you have, to convince them of that, to have them belief in that is what you're trying to do. So when you think about your selling, so that's you on the other side of that big chasm, and you have the value. But you're thinking, I need to help get across. I need to connect this value. How do I do it? How do I make this so it shrinks and we can get across the chasm to the value? And what you have to do is help your client or customer be convinced of things. And the way you convince them is to help them, you have to resonate with them. So you have to see that they will get maximum return. Help them see that the solution that they get, if they use your products or services, they'll get a return on it. So you have to resonate. You do have to know what they need, and you have to connect with them. You have to minimize the risk to them. How do you minimize the risk? What are the stories you're going to tell about how it's worked for others? So you have to substantiate. You have to substantiate you, your company, your solution, and your outcomes that you have. They have to believe. And the last thing is you have to show that you're the best choice. You have to differentiate. Why should I choose you versus somebody else? So in order to convince, you have to resonate, substantiate, and differentiate. And you have to do it through stories. Now, in order to sell and tell a good story and be a good convincer, you have to believe in what you're offering. You have to believe in the value that you provide. And in order, when you do believe that, then you can be passionate about the stories you tell, and you can be convincing in the way you have to be in order to cross that chasm to value. So we have one more poll to bring up. So Lucas, if you could bring up that poll. And I'm curious, and this is anonymous, so I'd like you to be honest, 15 seconds to answer this question. Our sales organization focuses on driving maximum value for the customer. That's what you're all about. How do we figure how we get maximum value? So you either strongly agree, you're neutral, you disagree, or strongly disagree. So you're thinking about what you do if you're an owner, what you do if you're a leader, what you hear if you're a person in the field, do you get the sense that people are, and you are focusing on maximum value for the customer? So we talked about these conversations, and success is crossing the chasm from value to your sales, and that's through good conversations. And the way you hold those conversations are going to be the things that concentrate on value, so getting maximum value. So I think the poll may be close to being ended, and let's take a look at the results. Well, this is a good group. I like this. So we have 40% who agree. That's fantastic. 48 who 40 who strongly agree, 48 who agree, 12 who are neutral, and then nobody's on the disagree or strongly disagree. Well, that makes sense. If you're going to attend a webinar about what sales winners do differently, you probably feel like I'm coming from a point of strength. But this audience right now in this group, 88% of you believe that you focus on value. And that's great. That means you can go a long way towards being able to convince that you can provide that value. So I want to go back here and just remind you what we said. So in the end of every sale, it is about resonating, substantiating, differentiating. That's how you get your fees or the best prices for your products. So you don't get pushed down on being a commodity. You win more often. You get loyalty too. So if you think about resonate, you got to look to the rational and the emotional side. What do people really care about? What are the things they need? What's important to them? It's not just the cleanliness of the world and what you're trying to do, whether it's in a product or a service, but how does it make them feel? Does it attract the right kind of tenants? Does it get the right kind of people? Do you connect with the people you want to by providing the products that make a difference? Now, can you tell a good story? As I said, you're offering your company an outcome. So do you have some examples to show? And do you differentiate? So differentiation is often difficult. It's the overall distinction. So combination of everything you have, nobody else has it. Individually, they might have some things, but overall they don't. But also creating that perception of scarcity, that they can't get what you have to offer just any place. They only can get it from you. And we're going to come back to this in a minute, how you can create that perception of scarcity for people. Now, what's interesting is that one of the things that we had listed, and it wasn't in the top 10, but it wasn't in the top 5 or so, is the overall value was more superior. So think about that. The overall value was superior. The good news about sales is years ago, for some of you, when I graduated school, people didn't say I was necessarily going to go into sales. But years have gone by, and you have chief revenue officers. You have the head of sales at a seat at the table now. They're not reporting in through somebody else. Why is that? Because the role of a salesperson has become more and more crucial. There are fewer sales jobs, unfortunately, than there used to be. But the ones that are there are more and more important. You are part of that overall value. It's how you deliver makes a difference in the overall value of your products and services. You often are a part of what somebody is buying. So we're going to get to this in a minute about where you can add that extra value, which is the last part of the equation. But before we do that, one of the things we also asked about was the average win-loss rates for all people in that survey. And we found that people felt like they had a 47% win rate. And just so you don't feel too badly about it, the overall win rate is at a point when you actually proposed a real solution. It's not just having a conversation with somebody. 28% of the people said they, on average, lost to competitors, but 25% they lost to no decision. Think about that. That's, for me, as a salesperson, when I served that role within my company, That's the most frustrating. I don't like losing to a competitor, but boy, I don't really like losing to no decision. Why? Because that means I didn't do my job. They wanted to do something, but I couldn't convince them that my solution was going to help them. I couldn't convince them that they would gain. It wasn't convincing that my product was better. It was convincing that they would get what they wanted from using it. And so convincing, all these things I talk about, is an important next step. So I need to connect. Remember, I said it's just the entry fee. It's not the be all and the end all. I need to convince that they will get what they are looking for, that I'm going to reduce their risk because we've done this before. We have a lot of examples. And I'm going to help them see that we're the best choice. And so that's what I need to convince. So we talked about the stories. We talked about things that have to go into it. Now, where does that take place? Well, here's the 6 phase of a typical buying and selling process. So we often think of our selling process as salespeople, and we never think about what the buying process is, and we should. So look at the bottom part of this, and you see the selling process. There's a lot of research that goes into it. I'm looking at the right people to go after. I have my go-to-market strategy. But I start with prospecting. So I'm looking for the right targets. I need to get in front of people to have conversations. Once I'm in front of them, I need to do some discovery, which is the first part of consultative selling and working towards a solution. But the second thing is, down below, is driving. If I only, and this is what we discovered, I'm giving you a tease on what you're going to see in a moment. If I only asked questions and waited for their answers and then said, oh, here's what you need. What about those times when I have something that's different, that's new to the market, that nobody has seen? You think the first time people sold copy machines, the first time people had an iPhone, that they said, oh yeah, I'm just dying to have this. So I asked a lot of questions. What do I need? Oh yeah, I need a better phone. Well, what's wrong with the phones they had? You know, the phones with all the buttons down the bottom? The phones with the stylus? They never thought they needed an iPhone. Somebody had to help drive that need. So it's not always, while it's important to understand needs, it's not the only thing. Of course, once we do that, then I can design the solution, and I can help win for myself. And then, of course, once I get it, I have account development. If you see on the top, that's what the buyer's going through. They're not buying unless they're dissatisfied at some point, either passively or actively. And sometimes when you're prospecting, you have to bring things to the fore that they don't know. Because if they're actively dissatisfied, sure, they're going to look out for a solution. But if they're passively, they're waiting for something to come their way, and you have to trigger that with them. They go through analysis, they interview people, they select people, they make the commitment. So whenever you are selling, you can use insights at different stages of this process, but realize that you have to be aware of where the buyer is as well as we go through. So I just wanted to put this in context for you so you understood what's happening on your side and what's happening on their side as you go through the process of buying and selling. So some of us, not all of us, but have you ever been in a corporate boardroom like this? And you go in, and if you think only of asking questions, you go into a higher level person, you go in whoever you're talking to. So here's a story from one of my clients. They had as their client MasterCard, and they would go in, meet with them on a regular basis. This was an account for them, but they were in fear of losing this large account. And so they decided to go in with the heavy hitters from the firm. And they were all set to do what everybody had done up to that point, is to say, what keeps you up at night? Now, not only that had become a trite question, in this particular case, it set off a reaction that they hadn't expected. What the client wanted to know is, Don't ask me what keeps me up at night. Everybody asks me that. Tell me what should be keeping me up at night. That's what I want to know. Here's my question to you. What should be keeping me up at night? I want to know. So here's where we get to the point where you can add more value through insights. What are the insights that you can bring to the table? What are the things that your customer, your buyer, your client says, no one else has brought that to me. I didn't understand it. I can see it well now. So I said I was going to tease you, and here's the answer to what are the 10 things that people did to be sales winners that others didn't. The first one is educated me with new ideas or perspectives. They brought something to the table. They told me what should be keeping me up at night. What are the things I don't know that I need to know in my business? Whether I'm buying your product or service. What is it that I don't know? Now, you can still ask questions. You can still connect. But they do want to know, what can you bring to the table? Now, the second thing was important. Remember, a while ago, we mentioned the Challenger sale, and this was really disrupting the thinking of the customer and in many ways making them uncomfortable. But what these winners did is they collaborated. They worked with them. They felt like they were on the same side of the table. So when they brought these new ideas and perspectives, they worked together. And then you see some of the things we talked about. Persuaded me we would achieve results, listened, understood, depicted the purchasing process accurately, which is important. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Connected, and overall value, we said, was number 10. And part of that overall value is what was brought to the table. So I want to tell you one more history lesson and one more thing about collaboration. So here's another blast from the past that you get to know. And this person is Kurt Lewin, who is considered one of the founders of organizational psychology. Now, everyone likes intestinal meat, right? That's the things that we generally in the United States don't eat, intestines and all kinds of other interesting things. Now, I learned the hard way that you have to be careful about that, because I delivered a session like this and outside the U.S., and a lot of people were wondering, well, wait a minute, we like intestinal meat. But back in World War II, Americans didn't want to eat that part of the cow. And of course, everybody was going through rationing, and they wanted to figure out, how can we get more people to eat all parts of the animal so we can ship the good stuff to the soldiers overseas? So Kurt Lewin set up a test with two groups of homemakers, and back then that's what they were called, homemakers. And the team lectured the first group about all the reasons for and benefits of eating intestinal meat. They covered everything. They applied social pressure. They did whatever they could. They would help the war effort. They give them every argument in the book. The second group, however, they participated in a facilitated discussion. They had roundtables, and they asked them how they might persuade others to do it. And they talked it out and role-played conversations and shared ideas and did all kinds of things. And the results were quite astounding. What they found is that 32% of the collaborative discussion group actually went on to serve intestines to their families. I know their families probably weren't happy, but it did the thing. Where only 3% of those that they lectured and gave all kinds of reasons to use intestine meat. 10 times as effective. So think about this, what this means when you're selling. When you do want to convince and you do want to connect, but it's also about being collaborative. How can you work with somebody? How can you help them see what's there? And that's what you're trying to do. In fact, the winners were 2.8 times more likely to collaborate, according to the people we surveyed. And those who educated with new ideas and perspectives, the winners were 3 times more likely to do it. So what's the point here? It's about educating. It's not about pitching. It's about really thinking, what can I bring to the table? How can I add that value? And do it in a collaborative way. In the end, what you want to help the buyer do is you want them to learn something. You want them to learn something that they don't know, that they look to you as a source of value and say, this is really worthwhile. You want them to feel something. There's an emotional side to this. You want them to feel that they will be better and feel a connection to you. And they want you to do something. You want them to work with you to help them to see how what you offer will be better for them in the long run. So that's the third part, is about collaborating. So if you connect, if you can convince them of the value, and if you collaborate, all that brings you together in a better way of thinking about value. So one last thing I want to leave with you before we go to Q&A is to think about, what are you trying to do here? Well, you want to make the biggest impact possible on your customer or client in a way that will be beneficial to them. And you want to differentiate. That's your goal in sales. Let them see that you'll have a big impact on them, and let them see that you differentiate. Typically, and this is still, there's aspects of this where it could be good, if you only ask about the need and solve to the need, the buyer defines the need, and everybody can do that. So the vision of what they have is only what they have themselves, nothing that you've added. And so the possibilities are limited. The other side is you get into a capabilities battle. If everybody selling to these buyers is selling to only what they said they needed, it's all about capabilities, and in many cases it could be the same, and it's all about the vision. However, if you can help them redefine the need by bringing insights, then what happens is you unleash impact that they hadn't seen before. They get excited about that, and you differentiate because you're the only one who's bringing these insights to the table. In the end, what happens is everybody's competing in the red ocean, traditional selling, where everybody is fishing. And you've gone out to the blue ocean and helping them see that, hey, we're different. There's more than you can get. So that's what we're all about connecting, convincing, and collaborating. So I thank you. And now it's time to go to questions, Lucas.
Thank you, John, for the presentation and everything. So I'm going to open it up to the Q&A. So if you haven't asked any questions, please do so at this time. I did have a few come in during the presentation, John, so we'll get started. The first question is, you mentioned we should provide insight to the prospects to stand out. Where do I get these insights, and what can I suggest that people don't already know?
So that's a great question, and that's a question we get, I think, comes a lot, because you're thinking, what can I provide? So first of all, the insight is something that they don't know, that the customer doesn't know. And think about all the work that you've done, all the years you might have been in sales, all the company experience, all the industry experience. So what do you know about I'm sure you can get them from ISSA, providing some insights into what's possible within that. But it starts at the basics. Think of all the people you have helped. Do you have a success story that's common? Can you start with saying, typically our customers start this way and go this way? It's just thinking about all the things that you've seen that that people didn't know at the beginning. They don't know all the things that you've seen. They're buying from you once or twice. They only see one side of it, but you've seen the outcomes. You've seen all the good things that happen. So the insights can come from there. But the other places insights can come from are your colleagues. What some of our clients do is they get together and say, let's brainstorm. What can we bring to the table? All of us together, let's just a bunch of us together and say, what are the insights that we can bring? Stay up on top of industry magazines. If you sell to hospitals Or if you're selling to a particular industry, read the industry magazines and find out what's important to them. Attend webinars and 10 other things that you can gain insights from others. It doesn't have to be unique to you. What your job is to pull that together and bring to the customer or the client. I think what happens when people see insights, they get intimidated by saying, I can't possibly bring anything to the table. But you can. You have a lot more to offer than you think. But as I said, if you're stuck, then brainstorm with your colleagues or read up on the industry magazines, find out what's going on, offer those to your customers, and you'll be surprised how often they go, hey, I didn't think of it that way. So it's both simple, but it takes some hard work to do that. Next question.
Thanks, John. The next question is, do you educate them even if you have not identified a pain they have?
So here's the thing. So you want to balance. So this is what's important to note. So I'm glad somebody asked that question. There are times when you get in the conversation where somebody presents something and you ask a few questions up front, and you can find out what they already know, what they're trying to solve, so on and so forth. And so you say, okay, I'm going to come up with a solution that matches to the answers. However, in the back of my mind, I know they didn't ask these 3 things or these 2 things. So I'm going to suggest that the way I would do it, I say, based on what I heard, here are the issues you're facing, and here's what you hope to have as an outcome. And there are some things we can do about that. But what I've found from my clients and other customers or other places that I've done the work with, this is what they often overlook. And then you say, how does that resonate with you? Or does that sound like something that you've dealt with before? Or how are you dealing with that aspect? Don't even give them a yes, no. How are you dealing with that aspect of it? So that's one way to do it, so you tack it on to the back end. The other time you might be able to educate is if you're going to a situation which you've seen a million times. You know what they're facing. And you can start out with, depending upon how well you know where you are in the conversation, is at some point you can say, your situation sounds very common. Let me outline something that I've seen a lot before. Can you tell me how that fits with what you're doing as well? So you may not know exactly because each person has their own individual needs, but you often, if you see it enough times, you can suggest that this is something they're looking for. So let me give you an example of what we do and I would do in a sales situation for us selling sales training. Oftentimes we do a lot of work with people on account management, and they'll talk about the issues they have facing account management. And we'll go through and they say, this is what they need, this is what they hope to get, great. And then I'll say, this is important, but what I find oftentimes is because selling strategic accounts, there's a longer sales cycle, the compensation plan doesn't sync with the account planning. So what happens is people still look short term. How does that fit with what you're doing? 90% of the time they say, that's exactly what's happening. You're exactly right. So now I've added insight. I could perhaps stand out from somebody else because everybody else just responded to their needs in account management, but I brought something new to the table. So you can still educate even though you've asked a few questions based on all the things that you know. And of course, the more experienced a salesperson is, the more experienced you are in the industry, it easier and feels more comfortable to do insights. So I suggest those who are not experienced, that's where you go to your colleagues and you start to get stories from them and find out what's possible that you may go. One last thing, I want to go back to the insights. I'm amazed how often that when I'm working with a new client, I'll go to their website and I'll read white papers and I'll read case studies and I'll listen to a demonstration, and then I'll talk to someone and say, how many of you where you do this? And you get blank stares. So sometimes just going to your own website, you can learn a lot. Next question.
Thanks, John. Next question. I got a couple more here, and then we'll wrap up. The next question is going to be, I've been in sales for a while, and I found it is all about relationships. You did mention connecting is important, but I would think it would be number one. Can you elaborate?
Certainly. So if you remember, the Harvard Business Review article did talk about relationships, sales are dead, solution selling is dead, really saying that's not important. And there is an aspect that it's not the only thing. I remember doing an interview with a buyer, and she said, she was high up in the organization. She said, I used to be able to pretty much select who I wanted to based on my relationships and who I felt comfortable with, and it was important. She said, I can't do that anymore. There are more people on my buying committee. There are more people looking over my shoulder. So where relationships are important for me to even entertain the idea of their coming in and entertaining the idea of using them, I better have some good, rational, solid things to base my decision on. So in the past, you could just say, I know them, I trust them, we're going to go with them. That's the relationship. You have to supply more than that. So that's why I said the relationships, I don't want you to stop forming them. They're still important, especially within your accounts. Keep them. But you can get yourself in trouble if you think that's the only thing that's going to win for you, because the buyer on the other side is getting more pressure to justify. So you can help out those people you have those relationships with by providing more of a justification. And the good news is if you have a relationship with, they'll share more with you. So it's not to discount them. It's not to say that's the end. But providing those insights and collaborating with them trumps even the relationships.
All right, John, last question here, and we'll wrap up. You showed the average win percentage to be in the 40s. That seems very high to me. Are we doing such a poor job of selling if our win rate is around 25%?
That question comes up often as well, and I think that, not to make anybody feel badly about their win percentage, it's important to note, I want to stress, maybe I didn't stress it enough, that's when you get to actually proposing something. So that's not having a first conversation with somebody, and it doesn't go beyond the initial stages. But when you actually propose and you have a chance to win, that's what we're looking at, number one. Number two, it does vary a little bit by industry because there's certain competition. It does include repeat business. So you should have a high number on your repeat business when people come back and you're winning those. But having said that, if your win percentage is low, then you do want to start dissecting it and say, we're only winning 25%. Now, here are the places you could look. We're bidding on too many things, where we're not qualifying the prospect well enough. We never had a chance to win. Why did we even do this? Especially if you respond to a lot of RFPs, your win percentage is going to be 9 to 10% if you're lucky. So that's number one. So ask yourself, am I qualifying properly? The second thing, in terms of qualifying, even if you have a chance, I find out people's win percentage is really low when they're not talking to the right decision maker. Salespeople have happy ears, and they come back from a meeting and say, oh, this is great, but they weren't talking to the right person. So I wouldn't even include that as getting to the right point. So qualifying properly is going to make a big difference in your win percentage. And then finally, when you do get it and you said, I qualified right, to the right people, everybody I'm talking to are the proper people, then you ask yourself, am I doing the things necessary? Am I making myself stand out by providing them insights, collaborating with them in a way that makes me stand out and differentiates? So you do want to dissect that lower win percentage and say, does it apply to me? So first of all, but then if it does, then start finding what part of the pipeline where you think you can make a difference. Because I think you really want to move that number up. It'll make a big difference for you, obviously, in the long run.
Perfect. Thanks again, John. At this time, we're going to conclude the webinar. If you have any questions, you can see John's direct contact on there. If you have any questions from ISSA, please contact myself at Lucas, Lucas, at issa.com. And I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks again, John.
Thank you, everyone. Bye now.